What's the biggest double life you've ever personally seen revealed? Not really revealed because it was always in the open. But my parents' friend has the weirdest double life situation I've ever seen. Paul was married to Clarissa for 12 years. And they had a son together. However, Paul and Clarissa break up. And Paul moves out. Shortly after, Paul starts dating Jenny. Shortly after Jenny gets pregnant, Paul realizes he misses Clarissa. And somehow talks Jenny and Clarissa into sharing him. Then, a few years later, Paul adds Renee to the mix. I should throw in these are decent looking women with jobs. And Paul himself is no rich Adonis either. So, Paul has a wife and 2 girlfriends. They each have their own house on the same street. And their own individual family lives. Paul spends the night with a different one each night. And they trade holidays. The women aren't romantically involved and they barely interact. So it's not like a poly relationship or even a sister-wife deal. How he pulled this off and how they make it work is beyond me. But it's been years now. Edit. I didn't think this was poly because the women aren't with each other. But apparently it can be poly by just them being with him. So when I first left home in my late teens, I shared a big house, I think 6+ bedrooms, with a close friend. His brother and some other randoms. Think frat house except no college university. Splitting the expenses worked out pretty well. So one of the guys worked at a port in customs or something. He had a uniform and ID etc. Left for work at the same time every morning and hung out with us after work. He was always down for attending social events with us and most of us liked him. Fast forward about a year and he starts telling us about how he can get us discounted TVs and other merchandise from the port. Unclaimed seized property that apparently no one sweats about if just a few items go astray. Everyone gave it a pass as it seemed sketchy. Then one day we come home to one of our housemates in shock and bawling like a baby. Turns out not only did he give the guy his life savings, he also gave him money borrowed from his dad. The customs guy had said he could get him a new car cheap. The long con. Turns out the guy doesn't work at the port. The name he gave us doesn't exist and we have no idea how he spent his days or came up with his share of the rent bills. Still creeps me out a little knowing I lived with a stranger for so long. Earlier this year I learned my dad has been addicted to heroin and stolen many expensive things from various members of my family. I knew that people had been getting things stolen from them but never even began to think it was my dad. He did get help and is now 5 months clean. But still working and building up my family's trust again. Fellow grad student has 2 young kids, one that is struggling to walk and communicate and is in the process of being diagnosed. She is pulling 10-60 nowadays, between interning and classes, plus being a mom and wife. She gets a call from a friend that expresses how excited she is to see her at the husband's work party. What? She didn't RSVP. And her husband said he would pop over for less than an hour then come home to be with her for a quiet dinner. Turns out he was bringing a date that wasn't her. They had been seeing each other for about 6 months and even had taken a trip together under the pretense of a business trip. Anytime he had been late or gone, we assume he was with her. Friend did her a solid and took a couple pics for the divorce lawyer. My grandmother passed away a couple years ago. While going through her house, my family found a box with my grandfather's name on it in his handwriting. My grandfather died before I was born. It was taped closed and the dust on it suggested it hadn't ever been opened. Inside, my family found newspaper clippings and other documents. Turns out that in the early 1900s, my grandfather took a road trip with friends to see the ocean. During their time at the beach, their car was stolen. They decided to stay a while, being in their late teens and out of school. They decided to earn some money and have a good time. My grandfather met a Mexican girl and married her within the course of a month. There was an article on the vehicle theft, as well as another on the marriage and a marriage certificate. We could never find information on what happened next. We don't even rightly know if they married for love, to get a citizenship, if they had kids, or even if he was legally divorced when he married my grandmother in the 1930s. We don't think my grandmother knew. We did find out his first wife returned to Mexico. She did have children, who say they don't think their mom had kids before she remarried. We sent them copies of the documents we found and they were as flabbergasted as we were. My boyfriend's sister's friend was married to this guy and had started a family with him. They just had their second child actually. The first was probably 7-8 years old. Every year he went on a hunting trip to Missouri for about a week. Turns out he wasn't hunting. Turns out he had another family there. 2 kids. Almost exactly the same ages as the other 2. The friend divorced him immediately when she found it. Edit. Words. A work colleague was exposed as an illegal immigrant using a false identity. He absconded back to his home country of Iraq and on arrival was arrested and hanged for war crimes. We only found this out when his wife threatened to sue the company for exposing him. I knew a girl from United Arab Emirates that came to Canada for uni. Her parents were super ballers. Like $5 million house back in UAE and she lived in a really nice app right downtown Toronto. She had a huge allowance and a CC for whatever she wanted online. Her mother wore a burqa and her family was super religious and straight edge. The double life? She was a hardcore raver party girl who was almost never sober and was in an open relationship with her MTF trans girl. Her act was a disaster. Ketamine covered mirrors all over the place and suspicious drug baggies in every conceivable crevasse. Take out food boxes. Clothes and sheet everywhere. You could hardly see the floor. She was a royal ducking mess any country you are from. If her parents knew 1/10,000th of what was going on she would be in the eep sheet. I remember seeing her a couple of times before her parents came for a visit. Incredibly distraught. Rocking back and forth with K all over her face repeating "Gotta call Mary Maid. Gotta call Mary Maid," a service that specialized in cleaning up party houses. The day before her parents arrived you could eat off of any surface in the house. All the clothes were ninja folded. Her crazy raver stuff was at her GFS. Her fridge had reasonable food in it. And she was sober. Bright-eyed. And bushy-tailed. Edit. Oops, misread the title. She was not caught. The Netherlands. Great-grandfather's family had an inkling that no amount of prosperity was worth risking what Hitler was spreading. He took his wife and 4 sons on a boat. Settled in Illinois-Wisconsin border to just fine middle-classism as skilled carpenters and other building tradesmen. The family didn't realize till nearly 1970 that the house they just left without selling in Holland. The Jewish family of husband, wife, and 4 boys who lived next door moved in without asking. Called themselves my family name, firsts and last. The local Protestant church had them every Sunday. They survived the Holocaust. Has any greater accidental zero effort hero ever happened? On my grandmother's 85th birthday, a party was organized. My whole family was there. This is all happening in northern Mexico. So the invitation rules were pretty loose. I was about 17 at the time. So were most of my cousins. One of them, Gerardo, didn't have a girlfriend at the time so he came with a friend, Oscar. They had been hanging around for about 4 years. But this was the first time Oscar was gonna meet the family. When they arrived an older cousin was going around the parking lot collecting money from every cousin so we could buy some booze. Gerardo said he would ask his father for some money. Oscar accompanied him. When they entered the hall where the main party was taking place, Oscar ran back out. He said he had seen his father who he had only seen twice before. Gerardo curiously asked who he was. They both entered and Oscar pointed to the man. Turns out my uncle was also Oscar's father. Oscar got to meet all of the family. We all got to meet the cousin we didn't knew we had. Edit. Hi everyone. Regarding Steve, I started out with fake names, using Steve for Oscar, but then figured there must be at least 100,000 Oscars on Mexico. So I changed most of them back. So Steve is Oscar. Sorry it wasn't someone more interesting. You can imagine it was Oscar's boyfriend if the edit doesn't please you. There was one dad in our mother's group that lost his high-flying big city financial job due to a market crash. To pay the bills, And because there were no jobs in finance at the time, he took the first job he could get, in a chicken abattoir. Bit of a change from a desk job to slaughtering chickens. But when you have a newborn baby and bills to pay, you step up. I know that sounds crazy. It's a group of new mums that meet weekly to swap war stories about newborns. And occasionally there would be a BBQ or something that the dads would come to as well. Every time I ran into him, I was always impressed with how much he was up to speed on current events and world news. We would talk about the latest political, financial and scientific news. There was not much discussion about chicken butchering. Turns out he was fired on his first day. Every day after that, for months, he would leave home in the morning, go to the pub, read newspapers all day, and then go home in the evening. She eventually found out. They are divorced now. Damn it, I came to this thread hoping for bank robbers and secret agents, but it's all just cheaters and kiddie diddlers. A friend of mine lives in San Diego and was recently telling me the story of her grandfather who has an entire family in Mexico that he kept hidden for decades. I'm talking he has kids that have kids. And one of his secret granddaughters has another kid. Dude is a great grandfather and nobody knew. Her grandfather is nearly 90. So it's unbelievable how much a quiet old man can keep from people. My cousin. He played it super cool around me and the rest of the family. I even admired him for it. However, he was a huge meth head and became increasingly paranoid and combative. He started shit with the wrong people and ended up getting gunned down in a drive-by. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. There was this kid at our church who started attending the youth group when he was about 15. Everyone loved him, but he was always a little standoffish. Fast forward 3 years to graduation time. Everyone kept asking him what he planned to do after high school and if he was looking forward to it. But he always changed the subject. Finally, he revealed to one of the adults that he wasn't graduating because he hasn't been to school since he was 8 years old. His dad removed him from school and never let him return. A whole bunch of shit went down after that. But the church members helped him do a fast-track HS degree in 3 years and have now paid for him to attend a 4-year university. In one of my previous jobs a few years ago, we hired this guy who turned out to be a really good partner. Worked hard. Never complained. After about 1.5 years of working with him, I get called into the office. He's there with the manager, assistant manager and 2 beefy guys in normal clothes with the exception of earpieces. He wanted to say goodbye to the bosses and explain why he had to leave the company. Turned out he was the son of some leader in his country and they had to relocate him. An opposing faction found out he was in our state and would have kidnapped him for leverage. I knew a guy who was so in love with his girlfriend. He's almost be moved to tears whenever she was away. Now, I'm not sure how healthy that is to begin with. But he was head over heels and worshipped her in every way. He was also a sex addict, having nightly encounters with internet with strangers. At first our group of friends saw him as a cheating bastard. But the more we learned about it, he literally sleeping with anyone he could. Which included women, men, and transgender partners. He was truly an addict. Not sure if this counts as a double life. Exactly. But my mom's a total sociopath. And got away with presenting herself as this total hippie mother I'll do anything for my kids person till I was 23 or so. At which point I found out she was stealing my identity, forging my checks. And then me and my sister realized that my dad, who'd recently divorced her, wasn't lying when he said she'd run up crazy credit card bills, cashed out his retirement account, filed false tax returns to cover it. And oh yeah, the 19 years old boys that she let stay in our house because they had falling outs with their parents were really drug dealers and also she was banging them. So, not exactly double lives. More like an insane amount of lying and manipulation. She did a lot more crazy shit, but it would take way too many words to explain. Cut her out of my life a decade ago. Was shitty for a while. All good now. Hannah Montana. This crazy woman was just an average ordinary teenage girl. But wait, she's also a world famous pop star. Thinking about it, I'm kind of like Hannah Montana in a way. I'm a successful and happy guy to my parents. But wait, I'm really a complete failure and dead inside. A local pastor in Florida gave me private marriage counseling many years ago. He was pious and godly, and I respected him very much. He insisted that the sanctity of marriage demanded that I make sacrifices of some of my desires, and that God would reward me later, in this life and marriage, for those sacrifices. About a month after the counseling concluded, he was forced to resign from his church. Turns out he got caught ducking his assistant pastor's wife. We had a brother-in-law we all liked a lot. The guy had a huge personality, was fun to be around, held a great job, and had a beautiful wife and young daughter. One day the FBI came and arrested him for child porn. Nobody saw it coming. He ended up doing some serious prison time and basically lost everything. My grandfather was in a romantic relationship with another man across the country for a few decades. My entire family knew about it, so it was no big deal. Or so we thought. Just last October, my grandfather died. We went to call his partner, and he was very surprised to learn that my grandfather had children. It's amazing how he hid an entire family for decades. My aunt didn't come out as a les until she was in her mid-40s. Coming from a pretty traditional Mexican family, she was scared that nobody would accept her for who she was. So she hid and lived this double life for the longest time. When she finally came out, it caught everyone by surprise. But everyone was extremely supportive of her.